This is also how you actually wrote in the book itself. You started your journey by knowing how to develop software, how to solve problems. But actually, as you go through the journey and you transform yourself, your career, you have to become a leader. You said in the book that you don't know actually how to lead people. Maybe can you walk us through how the journey from writing software into actually leading people, and what did you learn the most from that journey?
Yeah, I'm sure that your listeners have had the experience, and it's not even just about leading, just about following a requirement to the letter and have it not satisfy the customer. So that was the thing that I had to learn, is that because things are true and accurate, that doesn't mean that they're effective. And because I'm right, that doesn't mean that I'm effective. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing was, and I write a lot, and I talk about this a lot in my book and in my talks, the fuel of a human to get a human system to work, because it's a human system, not a machine. A single person working on a single problem might kind of operate like a machine, but when people come together, it's a human system, whether you like it or not. So to get that to work, the fuel of that is soul. If you don't care, and that was what I was accused of early in my career in software, was like not caring. If you don't care and you're not fueling that soul of the group, it's simply not effective. So it's not something where, oh, it can be nice and pleasant and effective or not and still effective. It's got to be soulful to be effective. Those two things I see a lot in companies, is that there's like the nice and the soulful on one side, and then there's the effective and the business results on the other. And those two things don't meet, but they do have to meet, because that soulfulness is part of the effectiveness. It's not a different thing. It's not a nice to have. It's not a side order. It's part of it. So one of the things that I started to do as I became a better leader was understanding how to connect with human beings. So I talk about the leading geeks. I always considered myself an introvert. Interestingly, I've recently taken the Myers-Briggs, and it sort of has me an introvert in some ways and an extrovert in others. So I'm sort of in between. But I really considered myself an introvert for sure. People are surprised by that because I speak and stuff, but I definitely do get my energy from being alone, not being with people. That's why I didn't want to have a career with people involved and all that stuff. But the thing is, even if you're an introvert, connecting with other human beings is an important part of getting things done. I read a really great book called Quiet, which is a guide to introverts. It's a great introvert kind of book, but it really explained like you can still be an introvert and connect with people. And that connecting with other human beings was the key for me in terms of becoming a better leader.
I think you mentioned something really important from my point of view, is that yes, at the end of the day, we deal with system and the humans, right? So it's not about just technologies. Probably that's why you started writing this book, Cultivating Transformations, a leader's guide to connecting the soulful and the practical. So you mentioned a lot of times about soulful here. And there's also the aspect here, which is transformational leadership. Maybe can you explain to us what does it mean? Because I know digital transformation, I know leadership, but what do you
Yeah,
mean by transformational leadership?
that's a great question. Thank you. So, transformational leadership is leading in a way that's changing basic paradigms, that's shaking up the status quo. So, we see all of a sudden a lot of people having the job of like transformation lead or VP of transformation. That's cropping up everywhere. I've been doing that job for years and it didn't have a name and you couldn't actually get a job doing that. But now it's a job everywhere. So, it's really changing the way we work. Some companies call it the future of work, but shifting those basic paradigms. Now, the reason I wrote this book is because that job is hard. The book actually sprung from a talk I did called How to Lead a Transformation Without Getting Fired, because it's such a hard job that people regularly get fired from it because of the fact that they're being asked to shake up the status quo and also somehow manage in the current. So if they shake it up too much, they end up getting fired, and it's common. And that's why it's such a hard job. So I couldn't find, as I was doing the job, a way or a place to go to learn these skills. It's not your traditional leadership skills. There's really no body of knowledge or study to learn how to be this person that changes the world from within the world. So that's why I wrote the book.
Yes, I think I agree that transformation sometimes is always considered something that is big, either big bang, or is it something like introducing new framework like agile these days seems to be still the digital transformation theme for a lot of companies. Or it could be also new processes or just new leaders coming in and just need to transform. You mentioned without getting fired. Why do you think a lot of transformation end up being someone getting fired?
So one of the things in the book that I talk about is dissonance and resonance. A transformational leader, you're being asked to create dissonance. You're being asked to shake up the way things are done. But if you don't balance that tension with resonance, then you're scaring people and you're shaking things up too much and you're breaking things and people don't understand you. So you need to get that balance between resonating with the way the organization works and thinks and shaking it up enough to make change. Otherwise, you're not doing anything. When you come in too overzealous and you're shaking things up too much without enough of a bridge to the resonance of the way things are, that's when people get fired. So, for example, you're trying to teach the organization to not micromanage. Like, this is a perfect example. But your boss who hired you as a transformation lead wants to micromanage you. So what do? And I've done this, but do you just ignore your boss and not report status to them? Because that's what you're trying to teach the organization to do. You're trying to change things, performance reviews, like you're trying to do away with performance reviews, but yet you're getting a performance review. Do you fight it and refuse to do it? Or how do you bridge that gap so that there's enough resonance where you're leading them to where they need to go? There's a book called Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan, and he talks about finding the adjacent possible. You can't jump to a bridge that the organization can't get to. You need to get them to the next step. And then from that step, you can get them to the step from there. So get to that next stepping stone. But if you're trying to push an organization to a place it can't go and make that leap over several steps, you risk getting fired. I worked with a transformation lead once who said, every day when I come to work, I don't know whether I'm going to get promoted or fired. And that is the job of a transformation lead. Like, you don't know whether you're going to get promoted or fired.
So sometimes this is counterintuitive, right? Because when you mention about transformation, it's always associated with some radical change that could happen fast. You mentioned about resonance, dissonance, like we have to find the adjacent place, how we transform people slowly, maybe, but still at the same time also delivering groundbreaking change within the organization and the mindset. Sometimes this is counterintuitive. How can you probably advise these transformation leaders to actually balance between wanting to get things fast as soon as possible, change people, versus understanding them and maybe hand-holding them, getting them to understand what is the purpose of the transformation?
Yeah. So this goes back to the human connection. One of the big things that was a lesson for me. So one of the pitfalls that I see as a transformational leader or transformation lead focusing too much on what they want to change and not enough listening to the organization and what the organizations are ready for, and also wanting to do things optimally. But the other pitfall is the other way around. I listen too much and I don't push enough dissonance. But one of the things that I've done, and a lot of Agilists are horrified by this, is that I created a roadmap for an organization based on what the adjacent possible is. Like, what are the next stepping stones for them? And it might not be what the Scrum Guide or the Agile books or the Agile leaders say is the order. And sometimes there's rework. So rework is a great topic too. We've been conditioned so much to be afraid of rework, like no rework. Rework can be optimal. So for example, we talk in Agile about meet them where they are, meet the organization where it is, meet the people where they are, but we don't do that. So if I go into an organization and they don't really have a strategy and they're not really aligned around strategy and goals, but their biggest problem is that I talk about having a nail in their hand. Like, they have pain because they're so busy that they can't even think about strategy. It can't come in talking about strategy. It may be optimal to start by building strategy as a foundation, but they're not ready. They need to stop the madness first. So that might not be the right order. That might not be what a lot of the paradigms say or the frameworks, but that's where they need to start. And so, yes, do we have to then backtrack to do strategy? Yeah. And then everybody says, why didn't we do this first? Because you couldn't, because you weren't ready. So that's something in terms of being a transformation leader where I think you really do need to be listening, not just pushing your agenda. I give another example of this too. It's the same example of there's too much madness going on. A lot of Agilists will come into an organization and say there's too much work in progress. A lot of times true. But does the organization have a culture where they value that? A lot of organizations do have a culture where they value that. So you can't just come in guns a-blazing saying, stop having too much, you need to work on half as much stuff. They can't, they're not ready yet. So you need to start to say, well, let's prioritize and look at it. Let's see where we can work on something over something else, but not stop working on everything. Because you'll be booted out immediately. That's how you get fired. You come into an organization and say, work on half as much stuff. They're like, okay, bye.
Yeah. So sometimes, yeah, this difference in mindset, right? So I know, like, when you hire an agile coach or transformational leader, of course, they will introduce something radical, but sometimes it's just too radical. Like, you can't even sense, is this even logical for the organization where culture doesn't exist to work in that way?